The cardboard box on the porch had only 2 words written across it, but they hit me harder than anything I had read in years. Moving out. A few feet away, my neighbor stood frozen with a suitcase beside her. Her face was calm enough to fool a stranger, but not someone who had lived next door to her for 3 years. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting every day until you have nothing left to fight with. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness can change lives, that people deserve second chances, and that hope often arrives when we least expect it, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. My name is Nathan Cooper, and this happened in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville, Tennessee. The woman standing on that porch was Grace Mitchell. We weren't close friends. We weren't family. We were simply neighbors who occasionally exchanged greetings while collecting mail or mowing our lawns. But over time, I noticed things. I noticed how she always smiled even when she looked tired. I noticed how she worked late and left early. I noticed how she never complained. Then, about 6 months before everything changed, I noticed something else. The smile started disappearing. The lights in her house stayed off more often. Packages stopped arriving. Her car sat in the driveway for days. Something was wrong. I later learned that Grace had lost her position when the small accounting firm she worked for closed unexpectedly. She burned through her savings trying to stay afloat. She took temporary jobs, sold furniture, and cut every expense possible. Still, the bills kept coming. The eviction notice arrived before she found another stable job. And now she stood outside her home with nowhere to go. As I walked toward her that afternoon, she avoided eye contact. Pride can be a heavy thing when life knocks you down. I looked at the boxes stacked beside the porch, and then at the suitcase. Without thinking too much, I said something that sounded ridiculous even to me. I told her to move in with me. She stared at me as if I had just made a joke at the worst possible moment. The look on her face practically said that wasn't funny. The truth was, I wasn't trying to be funny. I lived alone in a 3-bedroom house. 2 rooms sat empty. The idea felt obvious, but I understood why she didn't believe me. The world had taught her that offers usually came with conditions, so I did something that surprised even myself. I walked back across my lawn, unlocked my front door, grabbed the spare key hanging in my kitchen, and returned. Then, I placed it in her hand. No speeches. No pressure, no expectations. Just a key. For the first time that day, Grace looked genuinely shocked. Tears filled her eyes before she quickly turned away. That evening, the moving truck unloaded her belongings into my guest room, and just like that, 2 lonely neighbors became reluctant roommates. The first few weeks were awkward. Grace insisted on paying for groceries, even when she barely had money. She cleaned everything. She apologized constantly. It was as if she felt guilty for existing in the space. Meanwhile, I learned pieces of her story. I learned that after losing her parents years earlier, she had spent most of her adult life taking care of everyone, except herself. I learned she rarely asked for help because she feared becoming a burden. Most importantly, I learned how deeply rejection had shaped her. She expected people to leave. She expected kindness to disappear. She expected every good thing to have an expiration date. Months passed. Slowly, the house began to feel different. Warmer, livelier. Less empty. Grace eventually found work with a financial consulting company downtown. The pay wasn't incredible, but it was enough to start rebuilding. I remember the night. She received her first steady paycheck. She sat at the kitchen table staring at the direct deposit notification on her phone. Then she cried, not because of the amount, because it represented something bigger, a future, a chance to start again. For the first time in years, she could breathe. But the biggest change wasn't financial, it was emotional. The woman who had arrived, carrying only fear and uncertainty, slowly rediscovered confidence. She laughed more. She decorated the guest room. She planted flowers in the backyard. She started believing she deserved happiness. One spring evening, nearly a year after she moved in, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint. the Tennessee sky in shades of gold and orange. Grace looked at the garden she had spent months building and smiled. Then, she admitted something that stayed with me. She said the eviction wasn't the worst day of her life. The worst day was believing nobody would care when it happened. And the best day was realizing she had been wrong. Before we reach the ending, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness from someone when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might encourage someone who is struggling right now. A few months later, Grace moved into a small home of her own, just a few miles away. She had saved enough money, rebuilt her stability, and created a future she once thought was impossible. The day she left, she handed me a framed photograph. It showed our neighborhood on a sunny afternoon. Written beneath it were simple words. One key changed everything. Years have passed since then, but that picture still hangs in my living room, because it reminds me of something important. Sometimes we think changing a life requires wealth, power, or extraordinary resources. Often it doesn't. Sometimes it begins with noticing someone's pain. Sometimes it begins with opening a door. And sometimes it begins with proving that when you say, "I'm here for you," you truly mean it. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes there is goodness in the world. Stories like this remind us that compassion is never wasted, and even the smallest act of kindness can become the beginning of someone's second chance. And perhaps somewhere today, a person who feels completely alone is waiting for the same thing Grace found on her hardest day. A reminder that hope still lives in the hearts of ordinary people.